Ok, bon, bienvenue à tous, merci d'avoir répondu présent une nouvelle fois. On est très heureux de recevoir William aujourd'hui, parce que c'est la première fois qu'un Américain passe nous dire bonjour. C'est aussi la première fois qu'il vient en Europe, donc voilà, on est très heureux de le recevoir. Donc WMD, peut-être que vous le connaissez déjà, cette marque existe déjà depuis 2007. Il a fait déjà beaucoup de choses avant de se lancer dans le modulaire. Il faisait des pédales, beaucoup de DIY, beaucoup de construction personnelle. Et petit à petit, il s'est lancé dans les modules. Et sa ligne de modules est très intéressante. Il y a quelques produits que personnellement j'apprécie tout particulièrement. Et justement, je suis très content qu'on puisse pouvoir aborder d'anciens modules, enfin des modules qui sont sortis il y a quelques années, mais qui sont toujours, à mon avis, très intéressants. Donc on reviendra bien sûr sur les anciens modules, mais on va bien entendu aborder les nouveaux modules, les nouveaux produits qui vont sortir cette année. Et vous allez voir qu'il y en a un petit peu pour tous les goûts. Voilà. Donc cette présentation sera en anglais. A priori tout le monde comprend. Si jamais il y a quelque chose que vous n'avez pas compris, n'hésitez pas à demander, on fera la traduction. Bonjour à Internet aussi si vous nous regardez. Il y a quelqu'un qui est à côté du chat, Emmanuel, va répondre à vos questions. Donc si jamais vous avez des questions à poser, s'il y a quelque chose que vous n'avez pas compris, n'hésitez pas à poser vos questions dans le chat et on les posera à William directement. Voilà. Et puis voilà, donc je vais le laisser se présenter et on va commencer tout de suite. Donc je vous prie d'accueillir comme il se doit William.
Hello, bonjour, je m'appelle William Mathewson from WMD. A little bit of French in high school, so I'm trying to recall it all back from the train ride. So I'm here with a modular demonstration to show off our new keyboard and some of our modules, take some questions, and hopefully we all learn a few things. So first a little bit about us. We started off as a company in 2007 in Denver, Colorado in the United States. And we have grown into, over the last few years, into a company that employs 10 people. And has a small facility and a pick-and-place machine, and we actually manufacture for a number of other brands that build in the United States. So it's probably pretty hard to see from here, but we have a small milling machine for doing prototype panels and boards, and a small pick-and-place machine here, and that is Mickey, my production manager. He handles the day-to-day operations, making sure that everything runs smoothly in the shop. And then we do all of our assemblies by hand with all the guys. So testing, everything undergoes a very strict quality control. We try to have as few returns as possible, and then a photo of some modules packed up, ready to ship out. So modular, why modular? It's completely customizable. That's why I love it so much. It's build your own instrument. You get to create something that you otherwise couldn't do in the world of fixed architecture synthesizers. So now that there's drums and new modules like that coming into play, it's even more interesting and fantastic than it ever has been. So just a few minutes on just basics. I'm sure you guys already know most of the basics or all of the basics. But there's a few basic modules that make up a modular synthesizer. We're going to start off with an oscillator, which just makes noise. That's all it does. You can't turn it off. You can only make it higher or lower in frequency. And there's different waveforms. The standards, the most basic waveforms being a triangle and a sawtooth wave, and then those are converted into squares and sines and all your different other waveforms that are much more interesting. And then we have other modules that create voltages that give you time control, like an envelope generator, a LFO, and those things work together to give dynamics to your music, to your patches. But probably the most interesting basic audio module would be a filter. Takes your sound and removes some of the harmonic content from it. That's why it's called subtractive synthesis, is generally the type of synthesis we do with modular synths. That's Moog. It's the East Coast style of synthesis. So And then a voltage-controlled amplifier is the only reason that any of this is possible, because it takes a signal and controls, or is controlled by another signal. So it allows for endless possibilities inside the modular, and it's the basic building block of everything that we do. So this is, so I'm going to jump in with starting off with the keyboard here. Do we need to move the?
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, I
sorry.
need to move the camera. Yeah.
All right. So the basic modules we have set up here are, this is the key scanner. It takes information from the key bed with a 20-pin ribbon cable, and it puts out volt per octave with glide, gate, aftertouch, and retrigger, and velocity. Octave down and a glide knob here, different octaves. And this is the whole interface module for this keyboard set. This keyboard was originally designed just to be a set of these basic modules that I started working on wanting to do a basic line for people. There's a lot of other basic lines out there, but I wanted to do my own the way that I would like it. So I ended up partnering with Andrew Morelli of Steady State Fate, based out of New York, and we started throwing ideas back and forth, working on some of the basics and what would be interesting concepts. So as an example, this Spectrum is our oscillator. It's a very basic sawtooth core oscillator that runs from 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz with perfect tracking. With it, theoretically it'll do 10 octaves, but my strobe tuner only does 8 octaves, and it's flawless, perfect. So, and then it has an LFO mode, and it'll go low down to about 3 minutes per cycle. We added octave buttons as a feature because I like to be able to tune my oscillators and play musically and be able to turn up without having to crank a knob all the time. It makes it much, much easier. And then we added some interesting wave shapes, like a ramp width modulation and a center PWM, which takes a ramp wave and modulates into a pulse wave from the center. Yeah. And we also added a sub-octave that's either a sawtooth or a square, 1 or 2 octaves down. And then the sine shaper is a special shape that takes the triangle wave. A normal sine takes a triangle and distorts it with diodes or JFETs or some circuit elements, and you get a distorted signal that's not sonically perfect. And then when you synchronize, when you run into the sync input, you end up with some vertical bits that distort, and they're not round sounding. It no longer sounds at all like a sine. So we made our sine wave with a tracking filter that's built into this, and it always gives you a perfect sine. And then when you sync, you end up with a resonant filter, slightly resonant filter, that has a nice, very pleasant sound to it. So that's kind of the sine wave and the octave down and stuff. Those are the kind of special features we try to incorporate into this whole system. So most of the modules have little things that aren't in more basic modules. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Maybe we can hear something from the Spectrum if you want.
Yeah, we can hear some of the basic waveforms. So this is, of course, the sawtooth wave. It's a sawtooth core oscillator, and these are the octave buttons. You get 8 octaves with the button. There's your sleep. Is that too loud?
It's okay, but I think when there is sound, you need to speak a little
More
bit loud.
into the
Yes.
mic? Okay.
Loud, yes.
Yeah. There we go. All right. And so this is the sine wave. And then I will patch in the sync from the sub-octave on the other oscillator. So it sounds like a filter.
It sounds a lot more than a filter.
Yeah. Well, it's
It's more interesting.
yeah. Well, that was one of the things that we were really struggling with, was a basic sine just gets, it sounds like a sawtooth wave right away. And so this was a lot more musical to us. So whereas if you listen to the triangle, it has a lot more higher harmonic content because it'll square off. Yeah. So, and we have a button for linear and exponential FM. So if we take this sine wave, that's of course linear FM. And exponential FM no longer tracks with much musicality. It gets a little out of tune easily. So
Yes, maybe you can recall why is it interesting to have both in one module, exponential and linear.
well, exponential is really good for using it as a LFO, or giving it, you have a much wider range of control with the modulation input. So, for example, if you are running the sine output, and I can patch an envelope in here. Let's see. And if you're enveloping this, so hang with me for 1 minute while I patch a couple things. So I'm patching the gate signal to a couple of these ADSRVCA here, and I'm taking that out. One of them, so that we're not listening to a constant wave, is going to control our amplitude. And then this one is going to control the FM for this guy. So I'm patching the second ADSRVCA here to the FM input on, no, that's our output. There we go. The second one is the FM. And then we're going to run the sub-octave as sync. So that's a synced sine. Sorry, it took me a little while to get there. This is the synced sine with FM that's exponential and FM that's linear. So to answer your question in the long way. So that would be linear to exponential FM. Yeah. All right, so now that we've got that kind of figured out, I patched in a couple of these ADSRVCA modules. It's a very simple 4-knob ADSR envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release, and it has an integrated VCA to make it more space efficient, so you don't always have to patch your envelope to a VCA for making standard kind of voices. And then it gives you the VCA separately too, so you can use it with another source if you need a VCA for anything. So they'll cycle and they go fast and slow, and you set every parameter with the knob, and it's very, very, very straightforward.
How much is slow?
Slow is about, if you cycle the whole thing, I think it's around 25 seconds. It's not super slow, but it's slow. So here's that's slower, and then here's the fast. So that's the difference of the switch. That's slow. So that. So other modules we have in this system. This is the Blender, which is designed as 2 crossfaders that are manual, control with the knob, and then a single voltage controlled crossfader that takes the outputs of the other 2 and crossfades them together. So it's a 4-channel mixer set up as 3 crossfaders. And we put it over here next to the spectrums so you can blend your waveforms together in a simple way to give you all sorts of different complex waveforms in an easy fashion, or mix the 2 oscillators if you want to do dual sawtooth waves and play around with different sounds that way. So we're going to move away from sine waves and use the sawtooth wave into this Pole-zero filter, which is our 4-pole low-pass filter. It has a resonance control, cutoff control, FM, and then a front-end MOSFET saturation stage. So it's designed with MOSFETs throughout the system for a slightly different sound. It's warm, it's rich, I can use lots of descriptive terms, but most filters already sound awesome. This one is another one. So here's a cutoff sweep. A little more resonance.
That's good.
And then full resonance. It will, if I run the volt per octave signal in, it will track about 4 octaves before it starts to go 2 out of tune. So you can use it as another sine wave oscillator if you want. And then with the tracking, and a filter. So that's the sound of the filter.
Okay. Was it Pole-zero, right?
Yeah, that's the Pole-zero. Oh, and this is the saturation control here. And that is kind of...
Maybe we can, yes, we need more sound.
Yeah, it got quiet. So this is a saturation control, and it's kind of, if I had an oscilloscope here, it takes the ramp wave or the sawtooth wave and kind of turns it into an S shape like this. It blows out the middle and shrinks down the sides in a non-linear distortion fashion. So I could draw that if we want.
Yes,
We want to use
yes.
the whiteboard. So here's your input signal, and then here's 0 volts, and it kind of does a like this to it. Yeah. Yeah, non-linear, very non-linear distortion. So.
That's way of the guts.
Yes, yeah. It's little bits of distortion and non-linearities that make things interesting in synthesis. If everything was very clean, it would be sterile and boring sounding. Yeah. So, as I just got done explaining how clean the oscillator is, but we dirtied it up with the filter and the VCAs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to get a little bit of coffee.
Okay.
All right. So then next, if we want to continue this patch, we can go into using, I'm going to go back to using the sine wave and show you this other module, which is the Ultrafold. So I'm patching away from the Pole-zero and into this. And this is a Buchla style wave folder with an input distortion circuit, input level and distortion, a little bit of clipping, and then a voltage controllable feedback circuit, voltage controlled wave shift, and voltage controlled amount of wave folding. This is one of the flagship models in this keyboard, really defines its sound. So we give it the envelope for wave shift, or for fold CV. And this is just a raw sine wave running in. So this is fully folded up here. And you add a little input drive, and then that's not particularly aggressive.
Yes.
So you add a little bit of the feedback, and it'll skew the waveform back and forth from symmetrical to completely asymmetrical. Like it'll turn a triangle into a sawtooth again. So basic low folding, a little bit more distortion. So patch that back and forth into the filter and you can make some really, really wild timbres. So
Nice.
yeah.
Is it, tout le monde comprend, il n'y a pas de problème? Tout le monde suit?
What is
Yeah.
a wave folder?
Ah, what is a wave folder? That's a good question. Let me explain. So if we take so here's your kind of 0 volt axis. Here is a triangle wave. So this is what runs in. As it runs into the wave folder, it starts to, as you reach a point in voltage, here and here, when you are below that, it does nothing. When you're above that, it takes your signal and it doesn't just turn it around, but it slowly does this and sends it back down until you get back to the theoretical, until you stop, and then it'll turn back, it'll turn back over on itself, basically. I'm going to redraw this.
It's not saturation.
It's
No.
kind of like saturation, but it's rectifying saturation. So it'll go like this, and then back down, and then this is this same point here, where you were, and then it'll go back and end up like this. So it takes, and then there's a little, one more period. So it basically takes your signal, and as it passes this, it folds it over onto itself, and you get octave up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And it this one has 4 stages, so you can turn a 1 octave, you know, a C0, C1, or C0, we'll say, into a C4.
Yeah, by shrinking the
Yeah.
threshold.
Right.
The more you're
Right.
tight, the more you go up in octaves.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it doesn't shrink the threshold, but it adds, the threshold is pretty small, and it adds gain to this signal.
Yes.
So once it's about here, it folds over back again on itself. So after 1 stage, you end up with this, which is really more like this. And then after 2 stages, it would be that many, and then so on. So, and after this, it gets louder on the output, so you don't see the rest of your signal.
And this cycling is not perfect loop. You don't go.
My drawing is not perfect.
Okay.
It's close. So it's when you have these very sharp peaks here, it rounds those off as it starts to fold over. So they have kind of a rounder sound. They're not really precise ever. Yeah. So let me run a triangle in. So here's your basic triangle
Okay.
that is pretty much unfolded. I'm going to turn this up. And you can hear it start to clip right there, start to round off. And then as you add, that's the first peak folding over. There's the second one. There's a third harmonic, yep. 5th, 7th. Yep. So that's how it goes. It linearly takes a low end triangle and turns it into multiple octaves up. But it's smooth. Yeah. So, any other questions right now?
Not so far.
Okay. Great. All right. So, the other thing that it does that is, I'm going to use the VCO here, the other VCO. This is in LFO mode. This is the wave shift. Really slow. So it's basically moving the whole wave up and down, and you hear it folding over and over, but it's kind of doing a vibrato effect as you go up.
It was like when you were doing the demo in the first place, was like a kind of filter going through harmonics, but with what you've made us hear now, it sounds like a screwing filter. It does take the material and screw it in.
With the, you mean from the modulation? Yeah. As you go up from, so this is the slow LFO. That's a signal going. You hear the modulation signal going slowly, and it's just changing the amount of vertical offset.
It's almost like if you were putting an electric screwdriver on a metal plate and moving the screwdriver. It does something that is never heard before.
Yeah, wave folders are
Awesome.
Extremely awesome.
Yes.
Very good to play with.
They're an invention of, I believe, Don Buchla invented them, and
Oh yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, and it's very, very, very interesting. But the sounds you can get out of them, like from so adding some motion to it, I can do a few different LFO things. So that's just a wave shift. If we go into the wavefold CV, hey. So this is dynamically controlling the amount. With that, you can make dubstep. And if you go up into the audio rate, you can make some really, really thick and interesting timbres. Yeah. So, and then there's an additional feedback input on this one as well. We can do control of feedback with the LFO. So what that's doing, so right now it's set up at just one, it's not folding anything yet, but the feedback is taking this triangle signal here, and it's pushing it this way on the up ramp, and that ends up being more like this. And then on the down ramp it does the opposite and it goes the other way. And it will turn the triangle into a saw or into a ramp, and I reverse those. This is the saw, or the ramp, that's the saw.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's the feedback. That's the thing that we were able to figure out on this that makes it unique in modular right now.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
is on the Ultrafold.
This is on the Ultrafold still.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm.
So
Very deep modules, actually.
yeah, we tried
For
to.
basic ones, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So the goal with this this system, doing it like this, was to do basic modules with very advanced features that you don't have in other modules. So like a very basic system, and that you wouldn't have in like a MS-20 Mini or something like that. So we're trying to get people who aren't really into modular yet, but like synths, into modular by making a synth that is easy to use,
Yes.
relatively.
And it's a perfect thing to begin with because it's, as you said, it uses a simple function, but you add some other stuff that doesn't exist on maybe old school modules. So you can
Right.
do old school things and you can do modern things. So I think it's a good collection.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were going for.
Mm.
So, and the modules are mostly, they have multi-functions in them, like the ADSRVCA. The thing that newbies do the most is they take
Yes.
an oscillator, run it into an envelope, and it
Yes.
doesn't do anything because that's not how it works.
Mm.
So we tried to avoid some of those through education and modular design, make it easy for newbies to use. So
And just to do a little break, can you explain what WMD and SSF have? What did you bring each other to this project?
good question. I'm glad you asked. So Andrew designed all the panels. He did the graphical layouts and the artwork. He's very, very, very talented at that. He did all the knob positioning and everything, so everything's really ended up really clean. My modules tend to be a little bit more chaotic in terms of how I design them. So we ended up with a really unified looking system. And we equally split the engineering, electronics wise. So I design, it's my sawtooth core, but he did the triangle shaper, and he did the center ramp modulation and all that stuff. And I did the sign shaper. And then we both kind of worked on the Ultrafold to get things working. Andrew did the Blender, or the Pole-zero, I'm sorry, mostly through experimenting. So mostly a 50-50 split, I would say. So he's done most of the marketing materials and stuff, and then we're doing the building on everything at the WMD shop.
And since how many times did you work on this collection?
We've been working on it since halfway through 2013.
Okay.
Yeah, so long time coming
Yeah.
to get everything ready. So we finally started shipping the modules in January of this year, and then the Monolith system here, the whole keyboard, as is with cables and power and all that good stuff, is just now starting to ship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to add that all the modules are available separately. You don't need to buy
No.
the keyboards to.
Yeah, all the modules are separately available and can fit in their standard Eurorack. They work with anything. And then if you buy a system and don't like some of the modules, you can pull them out and sell them and put in other ones because it's fully Eurorack. And there's extra power headers. There's 3 empty spaces with a total of 14 HP for other modules, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, but it is sold as a one unit.
Right now,
Anyway.
it's sold as one unit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't sell the keyboard separately.
No, we're not selling the
And-
keyboard
and,
separately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So if we want that keyboard, that very keyboard, we have to buy the system
Yes.
and then modify it.
Yes.
No,
Which
that's
is-
the way that's the way modular works.
Yeah. Exactly. So. Yeah.
Okay, where do you want to go next?
I could go through some of the other modules that tie it together.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be wise. So I covered most of these modules. I didn't cover the Blender, but it's pretty straightforward with the crossfading. We have a buffered mult, which just takes a signal and re-amplifies it to its own level so that it can be safely passed to other signals. So when you have certain like volt per octave signals that are very critical for tuning, and you copy it across a whole bunch of modules, it can load it down. So we included a mult for making that not a problem, and also for just distribution of signals in an easy way. So you take, right now I have the gate, which needs to go to 2 things, but I have 1 output, so I multiply it out and send it to where it needs to go. Basic but necessary. This module here is the voltage controlled Mini Slew, and it's based on the Serge DUSG Universal Slew Generator. It uses the same old circuit that was developed in the 70s, and it's been modified extensively to make it modern. So old circuit with all the stuff around it modernized. So you have the old sound, the old feel and everything, but we added some new stuff to it. So you have cycling, which you normally have on it, and you have voltage control over the cycling. So if you want it to pulse it, you can do that with a gate or with a LFO, whatever you want to do. I guess I should explain what a slew limiter is.
Yes, maybe.
All right. So if you imagine, the simplest way to explain this is if you have a keyboard and you want to play a C and you want to go up to another C, it goes immediately. It goes from this voltage to this voltage, from like 1 to 2 volts exactly, and right away immediately. A slew limiter takes that signal, so it's a little jump like this. So this is C1 to C2, and it says, well, how fast do you want to go up? and you have a knob that'll control vertical changes. So it will allow you to limit this rise here with a pot. And then separately, when you go back down to C1, you can change the slope of this as much as you want with a separate knob. So you can have portamento up and then a much faster portamento down. So that's one way. It's not the most interesting thing you can do with it, but it's something you can do with it that can be very useful for doing sequences and such. So what that is it's a voltage follower with controllable rise and fall times. And then in addition, it has a gate that will tell you when you've reached your top and when you've reached your bottom, so you can use it to trigger other events in sync. Yeah, exactly. So, and then it will also self-cycle. You can use it as an event generator, as an envelope generator that has a rise and a fall time. I can patch some of that. Let me see. Patch it into the wave folder. So I'm going to right now take the gate signal into the input and take the regular out into the fold CV. And I decrease the release time here. Well, let's go into the trigger. So this is just creating one very fast up-down envelope. And then turning up the rise time. So it'll go up, and it's not like an ADSR because it'll go up and then it'll drop off because it's just a attack decay generator at this point. You can slow down the fall time separately as well. And then, so from that, you can do, it has a bipolar output. If we patch into this other jack. So let's make it. And then go backwards from have it folded. So you can do up and down envelopes. Yep. Fully voltage controlled. So now with these normally, I'm going to pull from the trigger and run it as a unsynced attack decay LFO. It's a skewable triangle basically. So this is a bipolar VCA on the output. Positive signal, negative signal. I don't know if you can see the LEDs flashing, but it shows you what the actual output voltage is doing. And then it has a voltage control over the shape of that signal. Which on the normal style circuit, it will slow it down like on a make noise maths. Going to a logarithmic shape slows down your envelope quite a lot, and going to an exponential shape speeds it up quite a lot because it's a voltage feedback. So on this one we added a time compensation circuit where this is linear and this is logarithmic. It's slower, but it's only a little bit slower. Back to linear, and this is exponential, which is slower, but just a little bit slower. So you have the full range without changing the speed too much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then you have voltage control over the shape, over the rise, over the fall, over both if you want, so you can use it to kind of track the keyboard, and then over the output voltage on the very CV. Yeah, so that's the slew generator. I can do some other patches with it if you guys like.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll do the portamento patch with the filter. Sawtooth. So I'm going to add a second sawtooth so that our sound is a little bit more interesting than just one saw through this Blender crossfader. Beefier, yeah. I'll have to tune it in a second. And then we're going to take this 1 volt per octave signal out of these two and patch it into our slew generator. Make sure it's not cycling. And then buffer that through the mult. And take this signal back to the volt per octave input on the filter so that it tracks with our keyboard to both oscillators. So that's two sawtooth waves that are almost in tune. And then, so that's the keyboard tracking perfectly. And this tracks 1 volt per octave. It'll input is exactly output voltage once it gets to the proper level, so you can use it for this. And then if I turn up the fall time, so it's rising immediately and falling slowly. You can do the same with the rise. And then, so this would be the exponential rise. Which will start to speed up. So just, it's not the full sweep, so it's exponential, but it is very slow. Yeah, down at that part of the range. So that's the slew limiter. Yeah. Any questions?
Tout le monde suit pour l'instant, pas de problème? C'est bon? Okay, okay. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
You can go to the next one.
Next one. All right. So the next one is, I'll go through in detail what the ADSRVCA can do. It is a bit similar to the slew limiter, but it has a more standard envelope generator style. In terms of, it has an up phase. I'll draw this. So here's 0 volts and here's 0 time. So right when you push the key down, you get a envelope that starts to go up. This is the attack phase. And then when it reaches this, its top point, whatever that voltage is, which is 8 volts on this, then it goes through the decay and these can be separate rates, and then while you're holding the key down still, it will sustain. And then at the point where you lift the key up, you go into the release phase. And this is exponential.
Everything else is linear? Module, or
now that I think about it, I think the decay is also exponential.
okay.
Yeah. And Andrew will probably get mad at me for not knowing this, but I think the whole thing might be exponential. I actually don't remember right now.
The whole
So
thing exponential.
I think it should be. The attack might be linear, but the two releases are definitely going to be exponential. Yeah. So, patching that in. So we have it on the amplitude envelope right now. So this is a fast attack, fast release. You hear just a little. That's a fast attack, fast release, just a little tiny pulse, and then pull the sustain all the way down. So if you do a slower decay, and add time to it. Yeah, and that's definitely exponential. And then here's a fast decay, slow attack. And then low sustain level, and then slow release. And then this one, when you pull the gate signal, you can make it loop. So you can use it as an amplitude modulator at fixed frequency. And then it'll also do much slower with the push button.
Is it digital?
No, it is all analog. Yeah. So every module in this is analog, but it has digital controls.
Yeah, well, I was not saying digital, but pingeable.
Oh, pingable.
Pingeable.
Yes, it is. So if
What does it mean?
that would be
Okay.
if you turn the sustain down, it'll act as an AD. But otherwise, it's not. You can't do an ADR.
Yeah.
Yeah. It won't change at the sustain level. You have to have the sustain all the way down to be able to use it as a just function generator. Yeah. So, I guess since I brought it up, all of the modules in here are analog, and all the wave shapes and everything are done in the analog domain. But all of the push buttons are done in the digital domain. So you have push buttons that will change, they won't double trigger, and after a minute of changing something, it'll remember where it was, so when you turn it back on, it's not in a different setting. It's in the same setting. Yeah.
Great. We have a question from internet.
Mhm.
Why did you choose to put the patch button?
Good question. Patch cables are on the bottom because I get the same question asked if I put them on the top and somebody put in their Eurorack module in their case. So it was a compromise where we decided, we're doing the modules first and decided to do the system later because we thought, this is actually, we had a couple things more and we have a full system here, so it would be a great system, so let's do it. But we'd already committed to jacks at the bottom for standard Eurorack. So what we did as a compromise and a patch for this problem is we're buying these cables that don't droop all over the keyboard. They stand up and they ship with 24 of these cables, so in different lengths. So if you use these, or you won't have the issue of the your knobs.
On the keyboard.
Yeah, exactly, on the keyboard and on the knobs, because they're stiff cables. So good question.
Okay, thank you, Internet.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So next we have a quad attenuator module, and it's pretty basic in function. It takes a signal in and turns it down by as much as you want, and then puts it out, and that's it. Useful for things like if you have on the Ultrafold, if you want less feedback from your CV source, like if you're using the envelope as a CV, I can patch that real quick. And so this is the feedback CV. So if you think that's too much feedback being added, then you take that signal and run this envelope output into the quad attenuator and take it to the Ultrafold. And now you have control over the amplitude of that signal. So pretty basic, but very necessary. Yep. And then next you have a scale polarized offset module, and it's very similar to the quad attenuator, but it gives you the ability to turn your signal down and also then turn it back up, but inverted. So if you want, what we can do with that and I'm going to use the filter instead because the feedback doesn't quite work for this. So now you can turn this down, but also invert it.
So they are attenuators.
Yeah, it's a bipolar attenuator,
Yeah.
and then you have an offset control. So you can change your baseline. So the filter has controls to do this. It has the cutoff and the FM level already, but some of the input jacks don't have that. So you patch through this module and it'll let you do the baseline and the amount of CV anywhere. Yep. And it also has a second input, so you could run a second signal in if you wanted to, like to do more complex modulations. So I'm using this as an LFO, and then the envelope added to it, so it's taking both signals.
Can we have a little bit more sound?
Yeah, it keeps getting
Okay, so
turned down by. Seems like it's me that keeps going down. At one point, it's going to get really loud.
okay.
You know what? I can actually. I'm going to turn this down, and it's a sustain on this VCA. All right, so that's what the scale polarized offset SPO does. So next we have a module called the Toolbox, which is kind of our Swiss Army knife of this keyboard. It's what makes this system from a beginner-only system into a intermediate and advanced user system. Because this is going to sit here, when you buy this thing, it's going to sit here, and you're not going to use it for weeks, because you're not going to need it, because you're not going to know what any of the things do probably, and as a total beginner. And that's fine, because when you then realize you need to do something more advanced or have an idea that you want to realize, you go to the toolbox and you have a unity gain mixer, you have a rectifier, which takes a signal. I'll start over on this guy. So a rectifier, so here's your triangle wave. This is your input signal. Rectifier takes this and makes it into this. So as you go negative, it inverts it to go positive. So you can take a sine and you end up with a double bump wave.
You lose volume when you do this?
You do lose volume when you do it. I can show you that. But you add harmonic content. So let's see. Output. So this is, I'm going to get rid of that. That's our normal signal. If we go into the rectify, it's a little bit lower in volume, but it's now, there's a kind of an octave up feeling to it. So, but it's not a good, perfect octave up. But it's really useful for taking an LFO that doesn't do anything when it's negative and making it, you know, kind of, it doubles the speed and it gives it a different shape, and good for solving little problems where you want constant modulation, but it always needs to be positive. So here's, it's like 1/2 of a wave folder stage. So this is the triangle, raw triangle, and then rectified. So mostly octave up. It's not quite perfect, but it's close. So, and then you have a comparator, which takes 2 inputs and then tells you if one is higher or not. And it does that by giving you a gate that's either 0 volts or 10 volts. So if input 1 is, I think it's input 1, input positive is higher than input negative, then it's true and it gives you a gate. So what that's useful for is making this triangle wave into a square wave, because it's going up and down below, or up and down up around this, and it turns it says if negative, output negative, if positive, output positive, basically. So I don't need to write the whole thing, it's pretty simple. And then we also have an analog OR. So, the other thing you can do with this comparator is that's a triangle, and then if you take another signal, let's see, I'm gonna have to start stealing your patch cables.
That's okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna take an LFO here, a triangle LFO, run it into this comparator. Now you have PWM from your triangle source that's giving you a pulse width signal.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you know what I mean by PWM?
Yeah.
Everybody?
Modulation de l'argent d'impulsion.
Yes.
Okay.
On y reviendra après.
Alright, just making sure. I can go over it if the internet wants it, but
Ah, ouais.
Yeah.
Oui, n'hésitez pas sur internet hein, si vous avez des questions à les poser. On a des questions, Emmanuel? Non. Ok.
okay. Alright, good. So that's it's loud. One.
But the sound it's quite fat.
Yeah. And what you can do with that is, say you want to use your, here's the sawtooth wave is what we're, no, that's not what we're hearing. We're hearing, we're hearing the PWM direct. So I'm going to patch this back across. Back into the blender and patch our output. So this is the triangle wave mixed with the, so there's our sawtooth wave. This is our triangle wave, which is being detuned by this, but through PWM on over here. But if we don't want the triangle wave, we want sub-octave PWM, then you plug into the sub. This is the square wave from the sub. That doesn't sound great at all, but that's sub-octave PWM. So if we took this signal, I'm taking the LFO signal, I'm going to attenuate it a little bit with the quad attenuator. Just to give a, give you a different flavor of audio. So, and we could.
Can we have more sound?
Yeah. So that's sub-octave PWM with the toolbox. So additionally on the toolbox is an analog OR, which is basically it takes two signals and it puts out whichever one is higher. So it lets you take two envelopes or maybe an envelope and an LFO, and instead of counteracting each other, they work together to make whatever higher voltage is present at the time, and it puts that out. And then you also have an inverter, which can always be useful to make a signal that's positive into a signal that is negative for use elsewhere. And you have a voltage controlled switch. So if you're playing with the Pole-zero and the Ultrafold as your two primary outputs and you want both available but not at the same time and want to be able to switch between them, you can use the manual override. Just patch both outputs into this, take this out and run it out of your synth. Then you have a preset. Just one. You have just one preset.
It's not bad.
Yeah. Right. And you could also use it to, it'll run at audio rate or very high audio rate. And you can use it to superimpose two signals on each other if you want a sine and a triangle at like a sine top and a triangle bottom. It'll kind of do that too. So.
And it's useful too with a sequencer when you have two lines of sequence and that you can sync. If you have the switch, you can then go one line to another. So you can, for example, if you have two 8-step sequence, you can have a 16-step sequence with a switch. So it's a very good tool.
Yeah. So there's no sequencer in this, but in your large modular like this, you could easily patch something like that. So that's the toolbox.
Will the toolbox be available to separately?
Yes. Oh yeah. Everything is available separately except for the key scan module because it needs the keyboard, and the levels module, which is a headphone amplifier and a master output for the keyboard, and then this buffered mult because it's already available. So yeah. And then the last module is the amplitude, and I'm going to run just from the filter again. Take this sawtooth. So let's see, where are we? So we're going straight out from this ADSRVCA here, and we've been using its VCA the whole time. But instead we're going to go from the amplitude.
By the way,
Yeah.
just before going to the amplitude, what kind of VCA did you choose on the VCA? On the yes.
The ADSRVCA is a OTA VCA based on the LM13700 chip.
Which means maybe.
Oh, it's a. So there's a bunch of different kinds of VCAs. There's the VCA that is just a transistor, the simplest kind. It's very non-linear. It distorts easily. It can act weird when you add when you have too high of levels. That's what's in the amplitude. But the OTA VCA is extremely stable. It's linear. It's easy to use. It fit in this module with all the other stuff we put on it.
It doesn't color the sound.
It doesn't color the sound very much. It does a little bit if you drive it very, very hard, but we've set this one up that you'd have to have a much louder signal than you could get in the system or in modular to be able to color the sound significantly. So just very basic, clean VCA that also allowed us to keep that module reasonably priced. Yeah. So the amplitude is the other kind of VCA. It's not totally discrete, but it's a dual transistor with an op amp. It's set up as a differential VCA, and it has a front end saturation circuit that is basically just allows the transistor to start distorting really, really easily. But it sounded nice. So that's this is all Andrew's design, except for the voltage control of the CV response curve, and he put a lot of time doing the voicing of this module, and then we made it work with variable CV response. So it has the ability to go from a linear response to an exponential response with voltage control over that response. So it can be punchier or smoother with the turn of a knob, or by running a signal in to control it. So let me patch into that from here. And it needs CV, so we're going to use the same envelope that we've been using. And you have control over the level, the amount of CV. And at this point it sounds pretty similar to the other VCA, but this is the saturation control. You're just starting to clip. It's quite distorted and loud, and yeah. So yeah, so it's a nicely voiced VCA that you can use it to do anything with in the system. Just run signal in and use it to control the amount of vibrato on the spectrum, as an example, or you can use it as your primary output VCA, which is what it's designed for. But it's just a VCA, but it's very versatile. So, and then you have the levels output module, which has a little headphone amplifier, and then +4 dBu unbalanced outputs on the back of the keyboard here. So, and that's it for this system.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Do you have some question about this keyboard on all this module?
How much?
How much?
On va voir ça après. On va ça avec Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we will make a quick pause, maybe 15 minutes, so you can drink some things there, and if you have some question, you can go to check the modules, and we'll go back in 15 minutes, actually.
Great,
So,
perfect.
okay.
All right.
Bien, alors on va reprendre cette petite présentation. Donc là vous avez vu les nouveaux modules WMD qui viennent juste de sortir et qu'on va recevoir très bientôt, d'ici à peu près 3 semaines, à peu près le temps qu'ils reviennent, parce que là après il va en Angleterre, le temps qu'ils reviennent, il va nous envoyer tout ça. Et maintenant on va revenir sur des modules qui sont déjà sortis depuis quelques temps, mais ça vaut vraiment le coup d'œil de se les remettre un petit peu en tête, parce que vous allez voir qu'ils sont, ça c'est vraiment the Spirit WMD, a very deep module, and you can do a lot of things with it. So let's do it. The first one is the Synchrodyne.
All right. So the Synchrodyne here, make sure that you can see the whole thing, is we're not looking at any of this. We're going to look at just this side first for now. Synchrodyne is a voltage controlled oscillator, sawtooth core, but it's capable of going from low frequency to 450 kilohertz. That'll be important later. But that's all it does. It's just a saw and a square. And what that drives is a PLL circuit, which is phase locked loop, set up as a frequency multiplier. So what it does is, it takes a frequency and using some feedback logic and a little simple analog circuit, it multiplies the frequency by, so you have a square wave that goes into it, and then you have a clock divider that...
Oh, excuse me,
Oh.
maybe we need to
Should I go
precise that it's a module with 3 segments. You have.
I guess I'm going too deep
Oh, okay.
first. You're right. Okay, so it has a phase lock loop, frequency multiplier, takes a slow clock in, makes it into a higher clock out, with divide ratios, or a multiply ratio and a divide ratio, and then some analog controls that control how that works. And then what the whole point of all that, though, is that it drives a filter. It's a switched capacitor filter, which uses a clock, a high-speed clock, to derive a cutoff frequency. So like most filters, you just use a voltage to give you your cutoff frequency. This one needs a clock. And you have a voltage-controlled oscillator. Through all this other stuff gives you a voltage-controlled filter. So it's kind of a weird way to go about it, but it has some really interesting artifacts to the sound that made it worthwhile to pursue this design. So starting with the oscillator, and I just have a that's one. It's just running through an envelope, so it goes through the VCA. So that's above 20 kilohertz. That's, and we can't see or hear this, but it goes all the way up to 450 kilohertz. And then the PLL. So this is the input to the PLL. And it's multiplying by 2 and then dividing by 2. So it's a 1-to-1 right now. So that's multiplying by 9, and these are integer multiplications. And then this is factors of 2 starting with 16. And it goes, and this will run up to about 600 kilohertz. So then what you can do with that is, I'm going to take the filter output, make sure nothing else is going into it. And put it in self-resonance. And you don't really hear anything yet, but we hear just a little bit of noise on it. So this is a filter in self-resonance. And I'm gonna I didn't have enough room in this case for a static voltage or a normal VCA, which is why it's pulsing. The pulsing is from the multimode envelope. So it'll stay about there. It's gonna, over 15 minutes, it'll drift down in amplitude. But so this is the Synchrodyne in self-oscillation. So it's a sine wave oscillator at a, right now it's 100 to 1 filter cutoff frequency clock to cutoff frequency ratio. 100 times the, so this is the input to the clock. We can't hear it. And if I turn it down so we can, this is what it's self-resonating at. You can hear that little bit of like maybe 12-ish kilohertz overtone. That's the clock that's just bleeding through. It's aliasing noise, which is the cool part about this, is it superimposes the clock just a little bit because it's taking little samples. But you can do that with some cheaper modules like sample and hold and the regular oscillator, if that's all you wanted to do. But this module gets its sound from the phase lock loop, and this is it starting to break down a little bit. So right now there's a compensation circuit is how the way it works. It's doing a clock input and a divider, and then it's looking at this divider. If you divide by 256, it says, okay, I'm going to try and put out all these new clocks until I sync up in phase with the 256th, which will change the output. So it's for each clock input, if we divide by 2, then once it sees this down, this clock fall here, it will say, okay, I'm resynced, and it'll stay in sync. And if you divide by 2, it's real easy to stay in sync, but if you divide by 256, you have a lot more time to resync, so you end up with sounds like this, which is it doing a whole bunch of really fast, and then it syncs and it says, oh, I need to slow down, and it slows down, but it slows down too fast. So this is stable, and then as you go, it'll slightly go unstable. This is a tracking speed control, and it's unstable. So to counterbalance that, there's a damping control, which slows down the tracking speed, but you can turn them both up and kind of slow down the slew rate of it resynchronizing. And this is both fully up, where it's just slightly lagging behind, and as you change the frequency, you get little ringing, and that's the sound of the PLL. That's what makes this module interesting. Is it's kind of an FM-like tone. And then you can sequence this. I don't know what this sequence is yet. there's the closely tracking, and then if we turn this down, now it's tracking pretty, it sounds like a sine wave. So as you turn the VCO frequency down, this is what the VCO frequency is. Oop. It's really high still, we can't hear it. But what you can do is, instead of running it in self-oscillation, turn this down. There's our sequence, sawtooth wave output. I'm going to go to the filter, which you can't hear because it's really low, because it's 100 to 1. And then we're going to turn up the multiply. And the input volume. I'll do that first.
Demo effect.
Yeah. So this is a 1024 input frequency to clock ratio. Yeah. So here's this is controlling the filter frequency. As we turn up the track speed. And the resonance. Turn up the damping. So this is maximum resonance and damping. Yeah, it's you can turn it up, the resonance all the way up, and it's easy, it's a cramped module a little bit, so it's easy to hit the other knobs when you're tweaking it sometimes, but... Some patch points. I'm going to take an envelope, same envelope that's running the VCA, and add it to this influence input. Make all kinds of sounds with it. So, in addition, so that was the 4-pole output, which will self-oscillate nicely. Then the 2-pole output is a little bit more tame, a little easier to control all the time. And then, in addition, there's a 2-pole wave-folded and a 4-pole wave-folded, which have single-stage wave-folders on the output. So, a little bit more aggressive sounding. And then, I'm going to pull the sequence, and this is the 2-pole output again. The front end has an input VCA, so you can control the amount of input to it if we wanted to with more cables.
Donc là, on est bien d'accord que tout ce que vous entendez, c'est un seul module. Ouais.
Put this back in. So right now, the input level is being controlled by the same envelope. And it has a front-end wave folder, which will give you some octave up. And so that's nothing, that's just the resonance flying around. And it's also a multimode filter. So this is low pass, this is band pass, and this is high pass. So that's kind of the basics. I mean, I don't know if that's the basics. I kind of just making sounds, but yeah, it's designed to just be a very experimental module, and that's just the Synchrodyne side. And we decided to do an expander for it.
Just wait, I need to add something. It's a very interesting module because for me it explains. Technically, it's a very deep module. You can, if you do some electronics, there is something very theoretical you need to know if you want to. But you can use it totally. If you don't understand what he say, it's not a problem because you can patch it and just use your ears. And I have one. I don't know how it works really, but you can get all these sounds by experimentation. So for me, it's the wonderful sides of the modular format because you can be a very technical guy and know all the secret stuff of modules, and so you will be very precise in your play. But you can also be a total newcomer, and just if you have some ears, if you are patient enough to discover the module, you can make some great things with this. And well, this is fantastic. We are in the modular world. In the other, it's difficult to use another instrument like this because some of those you need to technically know how to use them. For example, a violin or something like this. But with the modules, you can just be in front of that and try and do some experiments and discover things wonderful, but you don't know how it works. So yes, it's a kind of module that you do with it.
Exactly. It's designed to just, modular in general is designed for experimentation and for creating new sounds that you're not really trying to create that surprise you, which is probably the most fun I've ever had making music. So, any questions on the Synchrodyne?
Yeah, you were saying you had developed an expander?
Yeah, I've developed an expander for it, and the expander is larger than the initial module.
It's the craziest.
It was.
Isn't it an expander?
It is. It's vastly expanded. So, but more than it doesn't just pull out features of this and add them to jacks. So there's a lot to it. So if I go on too long about any one thing, or if you have any questions, just stop me and interrupt.
It's so big that I have difficulties to put it in the frame.
Yeah.
Just squeeze it in.
Yeah. Can you see okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to try and just use minimum number of cables here to explain everything. I am going to disable this VCA just so I can do some drone patches that'll be simpler. So, a basic sound from this We'll get rid of that. So this is the Synchrodyne as it was set up before. Let me create a good baseline. I'm going to do a drone, and we'll add an envelope a little bit later to that. So this is just a Synchrodyne, oscillator 1. What the Synchrodyne Expand brings is a second oscillator that's the same as this one, but with it has PWM on the output of the PWM wave, which is surprisingly about the same. So this is the other oscillator now controlling. There's a switch here to switch between the two. So this is a primary oscillator, this is a secondary oscillator, and it is in PWM mode, which doesn't do anything right now because it cares about clock frequency, not pulse width. So what I'm going to do is combine both oscillators in an OR mode, which means that if one is high and the other is low, then this is perfect. Then this is the output. And then when one is high and they're both high, you get this as the output. So it's whichever's, if one's high or if the other's high, you get a high output, which means that this clock pulse disappears from the signal chain. So it creates kind of what it will do really, really fast is create a part of the signal where you have a high frequency and a part of the signal where you have a low frequency. And they're existing simultaneously at all times. So for every cycle that goes through of the audio, you get this dual frequency system. So this is the first one. I'm going to try and set this up so it sounds right here. So that's bringing down up the pulse width and taking over more of the other frequency. So it's bringing the overall frequency down. It gives you kind of a lush, deep bass sound when you modulate it. I'm going to turn down the input waveform. So that's the first one, and that's the other one. It's a low frequency. And I'm going to add in, let's see, I'm going to put the sequence back on. Takes a little while to get it kind of tweaked for what I'm going for. So bear with me for a minute. So right now I can take over the sequence, the frequency of the filter with this other oscillator. I'm disabling 1 volt per octave for this, so now that's a static frequency. So this is a normal one. Here's the other one. And both at the same time. that's with an envelope controlling the second oscillator. Second oscillator sounds like this. It's kind of doing a four-mans with the filter, because you have two simultaneous cutoff points. You can also do the PWM. That's the other one. That's the secondary. Is the first one. So that's what you can do controlling the clock of the Synchrodyne, which is one of the main reasons for this is to do those dual format type sounds. Then we have separately, if you were to use this as a set of modules, now you have a secondary oscillator that you can also run into the input. So I'm going to reapply 1 volt per octave and turn this up. Getting close. You can do it kind of standard double saw type sound, that's fine. And then reapply this gate influence input. Bring in both filters, or both oscillators again. Make all kinds of semi-interesting sounds with it. Right now, I'm not getting the most amazing sounds right now, but... So you also get a second PLL on this oscillator, which will give you the ability to do a PLL triangle. This is probably going to be high frequency. So this is a second triangle. That's pretty glitchy. So it has a very specific sound. But you could run this into the primary input and take from that output, from the main output. And run a, where's my CD? It's a little hard to hear, but so it's wave folding the triangle here. You can do it's a lot of noise with it at times. So it's attempting to sync and it can't really find proper sync. But what's driving it, this is the triangle and this is the PLL, which doesn't really do as much with the wave folder on. So that's kind of the second oscillator side of what the Synchrodyne Expand does. what else you have in it is an input compressor that I'm going to remove some of these. I'm going to turn the compression up a bit, turn the resonance up. And then the input compressor looks at the output signal and reduces the gain of the input signal. So it'll, instead of distorting when it resonates and hits the rails, it will just duck the input signal, attempting to keep it all at the same level. It's like an automatic gain control. So here's without the compression. The resonance tends to go away a bit. Now you're getting the resonance, but you're still getting some of the fundamental. It sounds a little different, but it's not distorted. So turning this down, all the way back up, allows it to ring out a bit more. So, and that's especially useful. You set the detector. It'll look at the 2-pole output, the 4-pole output, or the input itself, for a real automatic gain control. So on the 4 output, so that's distorted, that's a sawtooth wave, and it's pulling it down to almost nothing. So with appropriate amounts of resonance, it'll help you get smoother sounds out of it. So that's the compressor side. You can also use that separately. There's a whole bunch of jacks on here that allow you to isolate most of these things and use them separately. So compressor could be used, you don't even have to use the rest of the Synchrodyne. If you have one in your system, now you have a compressor. Basic compressor. It also has a second filter that will track 1 volt per octave. It tracks this VCO only with resonance, and it does, right now it's tracking the old signal, the bad triangle wave we had. So you have another sine wave oscillator if you want, or another filter that you can run an input into. And we'll take this sawtooth wave. So that's one of the other things that it has. And then it adds voltage control over the tracking and damping on this one. And PLL desynchronization. It will let you put a 3rd clock in if you want to do 3 simultaneous filter frequencies with multiple clocks. Secondary input, PWM output for this, synchronization, lots of other ins and outs. So, any questions on that? I tell most people just don't buy both at once ever, because you won't get anything out of it that's useful. This takes a lot of dedication to get really good sounds out of, but they're in there. So, but
Voilà.
No, go ahead.
Et ben voilà, on va faire une pause. Hein.
Non, effectivement, it's very deep module, very complicated, but you can stay all your life with it and find new stuff every time you use it. So it's kind of fun. But
yeah, it's.
But you need to love these basic sounds you have heard. If you like that, you will be in love with it, and it's very specific. But well. It's I think it's very unique. I don't hear this kind of sounds into the modular market. So That's why it's cool. Also,
if you have a lot of modulation sources, LFOs, stuff like that to patch into it, you can get a lot more out of it. I was trying not to fill it with cables just so I could keep explaining stuff. But without filling it with cables, sometimes it's too abrupt, the changes you get. So it doesn't quite do everything that it sounds like it should. So yeah.
Okay,
So
good. So what you want to talk right now?
Well, we could talk about the sequential switch matrix.
Oh, yeah.
Total shift in gears.
Yeah.
So this module is designed to give you 4 inputs and 4 outputs, and then they're controlled in a matrix mixer. So you can control which inputs go to which outputs by the push of a button here. So, okay, that's useful, that's neat, I guess. But the fun part is that you can change through all these matrices with CV or with gate control. It'll clock and it'll reset. So you can do a patch and then push a button and step through and reroute your signals, audio or control voltage, into a whole nother patch. Or you can take some signals and run them, if you have like 3 oscillators you want to select from, or just to demo or something through a filter, 3 filters, you can just patch them all in and then push the button and click through them and change which filter you're listening to. So if you're doing filter audits, that's a really easy way to actually hear the difference and get them all tuned in and see which one you really like. It'll clock at audio rate, which means that you can do really fast, strange modulations and totally mix up everything that's happening all at once. You can turn a nice normal sound into complete chaos.
You're talking about matrix, but also about mixing.
So let me explain that. It's like a sequential switch in that you have switch inputs that route to outputs.
Yeah.
So normally you have like 4 or 8 inputs and it routes to 1 output and it changes through. This does that if you set it to just 1 input to 1 output. But what if you want to run 2 inputs to 1 output? It'll mix at unity gain. Yeah. So it's a matrix mixer, but it's a sequential switch at the same time. Yeah. So, and it has some like sequencing functions. So I'm gonna have to set up a fairly complex patch to do anything too interesting with it, but that shouldn't take more than a minute or 2. So I'm going to run the phase displacement oscillator here, output from the triple bipolar VCA into input 1, give this an envelope, and let's patch so we can hear it. And we're going to use output 1. I'm going to run 2 from the Synchrodyne. I'm going to take a sawtooth wave from this oscillator here, phase displacement oscillator, run it into the filter, come out of the filter, and that of the other side of the filter into 4.
Ça comme on peut faire une matrice, 4 entrées, 4 sorties, et on peut définir. Ouais, exactement. Bien travaillé. On révise avant de venir, c'est bien.
J'ai fait un travail préparatoire.
Alright, and sorry, this is kind of taking a minute to get something interesting to show off. Audio patching, I don't know what it's going to sound like.
Et aujourd'hui, en disponible, vous avez les deux principales matrices aujourd'hui disponibles. C'est celle-ci, qui est 4 entrées, 4 sorties. Et il y a celle d'Alison aussi, qui était 16-16. Donc après, ça dépend de ce que vous voulez faire. Et l'avantage de ces matrices, c'est qu'effectivement, si vous avez un système que vous utilisez pour faire du live, et donc que vous patchez tout le temps de la même manière, ça peut être intéressant. Si vous changez de morceau, par exemple, de rappeler instantanément un certain type de patch. Il y a des mémoires, bien sûr. Bien sûr.
Mais sinon, c'est pas drôle.
Alright. So right now, both matrices are set the same, but these are our different sounds. So now it's going between these two different oscillators. I think one of my cables is going
Là, il change de patch automatiquement de mémoire en fait.
So it's switching between two matrices, giving you two different sets, and it's being clocked by this other oscillator here. It'll go really high into the audio range, but I'm going to pull the clock, and then so input 4 is coming from the Geiger counter here, which I'll explain in a little bit, and output 3 is going to the Geiger counter. Output 2 is going into the filter. So this is going to be a feedback type patch. So let's hear the filter. This output. This is the matrix patch basically taking its own output and running it back into itself, but you can turn it off with the button, or step through it, or whatever you want to do. So that's a feedback patch, and then let's bring the Geiger counter in. So this is the Geiger counter making some noises, being patched with that filter. I'm hitting the random button. So this is a basic feedback patch, just sending stuff back around. You look at each routing exactly, but it's there's different buttons that affect how it sequences. You can reverse the sequencing. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. So I'm reversing the sequencing. You can set a high value. I think one of these spectators is doing that. Sorry, I think one of my cables is not working. So that's one of the things you can do with the switch matrix is make weird feedback patches. You could also do the same thing with CV. If you have multiple sequencers, you could take their outputs, run them all into the input, and then choose where they go and what order and however you want it to work. You can do weird stuff like that. It has an expander that turns each button every time you turn it on into a gate. So it turns into a gate sequencer. But it kind of needs more complex of a system than this to do anything too much more interesting, just because you need a lot of sound sources and a lot of modulation. I only have one envelope in this system, so I can't do that much with it right now.
Yes, and
but
you need to have an ID before we
right, yeah, you can kind of jam patch it a little bit, but you get something like that. So that's a switch matrix. I should pull this and do maybe the phase displacement oscillator.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is a analog core oscillator with a digital wave shaper. It's a idea based on what Casio and Yamaha both did in the 1980s that killed the analog synthesizer the first time. It's phase synthesis, so it's the ability to do frequency modulation digitally, and it's pretty powerful in what you can do with it, in that as you phase modulate as opposed to frequency modulate. You know what I mean by frequency modulate? You get it changes the frequency, you get vibrato. Yeah.
Même principe que la radio, mais appliqué à l'audio.
It does that, but when you exceed the limits of frequency modulation, when you turn the frequency and it stops, you end up with it goes out of tune. So, and with phase modulation, it never goes out of tune because it's just an offset to what the waveform looks like. So this
Donc là on change de module, c'est le PDO maintenant.
So this is a sine wave out from this oscillator, and this is output 1, which is the main output that is not phase controllable. So this is output 2, and it is expanded with this other module, so I will be using this in a minute. You see okay?
That's okay.
Okay. So this is output 2. Sounds the same. They can be any waveform by pushing this. There's a waveform select button. You select your channel. You change your waveform. Each output can be a different waveform, and you can select it whatever you want it to be. So this is the sine wave out of output 2, and what's interesting about this is when you take output 1 and plug it into CV2, it creates a wave-folded, phase-stable output that gives you, it's called phase distortion, and it's this is phase-stable phase distortion. So it's kind of a wave-folding effect, and you can cascade this and listen to output 3, take output 2, run it into CV3. And then if you put VCAs in this signal path, you could go, wow, wow. You could do kind of that wave folded type sound. And this module with the expander does exactly that, where you get, I'm going to pull these. Here's your bias controls for the VCAs, and then running CV, and just 1 second, turn the tempo down on this. So I'm going to apply a little bit of an envelope, which you can already kind of hear. So there's your sine wave. So that's the phase stable phase modulation. If we take, let's see, I'm going to use the Synchrodyne as a sine wave oscillator and run this into phase input 2. Maybe. There we go. So this is a second oscillator running in at the same time to this other phase input. So this is very heavy phase modulation that you wouldn't be able to do with frequency modulation, because it would do basically this, where it just goes horribly out of tune. Change the fundamental. And if I had an attenuator, I could show you, I don't have any attenuators in this case, but I could show you that it kind of would be phase stable to a point. It wouldn't change the frequency, but that once you hit that point, it would go beyond it. So that's how the phase displacement oscillator works and what makes it interesting. Makes some nice, interesting bass tones and stuff. So the other thing, that's the audio side of it. the other side of it is that it works as a low frequency oscillator, and you have independent control of the phase of each of the outputs. So you can use it to, and this is where it helps to have a bunch more modules. If you had 3 filters, you could offset their relative frequency by a little bit of time running it in low frequency oscillator mode, and be able to peak your 3 filters simultaneously, creating kind of a wasp warble buzzing effect with how like a constant fall type effect too, if you offset each sine wave by 120 degrees. So I can draw what I mean. So any questions about how that works, or what it is, or what it's useful for?
Donc pour résumer, c'est un oscillateur en fait qui comprend 4 oscillateurs en lui-même qui sont tous liés ensemble. Et vous pouvez choisir, donc la fréquence est la même pour tous, mais vous pouvez choisir une forme d'onde différente pour tous les oscillateurs, d'accord? Donc quand on l'utilise en vitesse audio, ça fait un oscillateur, mais on peut l'utiliser en LFO, ce qui fait que vous allez avoir 4 LFO avec des sorties indépendantes, et donc forme d'onde indépendante que vous allez pouvoir déphaser. Et quand vous allez envoyer par exemple ces 4 formes d'ondes déphasées sur 4 filtres différents, vous allez pouvoir les piloter de manière entre guillemets synchronisée, puisqu'ils vont être sur la même fréquence. Donc vous allez pouvoir jouer sur le déphasage et donc créer des retards comme ça entre les contrôles. Donc c'est très intéressant. Ouais. Ouais. Can we go?
Okay.
Sorry.
So what the phase displacement means is, so the blue one is your primary oscillator, and you have a knob that controls this offset here between the two. So you can use that to change this time, which lets you do some interesting things in time. So if you use 3 of these and they're 120 degrees offset, you have one that's always coming up, one that's always mostly stable, and one that's always falling. And you can do some interesting modulation stuff with that. If you have 2 of these, you can create the fattest supersaw that's possible by doing a constant 120 degree offset to the 3 phase inputs, and it'll act as a supersaw.
That's each can be sized differently. Each out can be phased differently.
Phased differently, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Each of 4. I don't think I explained this that well. Each of the 4 outputs has phase offset pot directly that lets you change from 0 to plus or minus 360 degrees. Yep. And CV for that. So, yeah, and CV, which is the phase modulation, the distortion that makes the wave folding. So, yeah, so that's how that one works. We could go to the multimode envelope, which I could explain.
Or do you want to?
Oh, great.
We have a question from internet. Do we keep producing these all modules, or will you stop them at a
Oh yeah. No, these are all in production still,
okay.
and
so you will keep them.
No plans. Yeah, no plans to stop producing anything.
Okay.
The only thing we've ever discontinued was the invert offset Mark I, because I decided I wanted to make it better, and the gamma wave source, which is in development again for the new gamma wave source, because the old one I wanted to stop selling because they're very, very glitchy. So I know I can do a lot better at that kind of a wavetable design. So I pulled that one, and we're gonna start start putting that out hopefully sometime in 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe we can precise that the expander of the PDO can be used separately as a 3VCA.
Yes, it can. Before we go into something else, what the triple bipolar VCA does is it takes a signal, and there's 3 of them, three VCAs. Each one will take an input and another input, and it'll do a fade through 0 of them. So you can have one input that goes to 0, and then you get the other input. Now it's also normaled so that you plug one signal in, and at the negative input jack is the inverted version of that. So as you go from fully counterclockwise to fully clockwise, you get fully counterclockwise a inverted version of your signal. At 0, you get nothing, and then at fully clockwise, you get the positive version. That's also known as a ring modulator, and it gives you the ability to do, well, ring modulation tones. It's also very useful for CV or for crossfading CVs. It works for audio fine, but it's really designed for CV and for implementing stable phase distortion with the PDO. So it's an expander, but it works totally fine by itself. So, yeah.
C'est ça qui est intéressant, c'est que comme l'expander est autonome, vous pouvez l'acheter de manière tout seul pour faire pour avoir un triple VCA et puis pour faire ce qu'il vient de dire, une modulateur, tout ça. Si vous avez dans l'optique plus tard d'acheter le PDO, au moins vous aurez ce bloc qui peut fonctionner ensemble. Mais l'avantage de cet expander là, c'est qu'au moins l'expander ne sert pas qu'à un seul module, il est aussi autonome tout seul. C'est quand même assez intéressant. Ok.
Great. All right, so Multimode Envelope is the envelope module that I developed a few years ago to be a very powerful shaper envelope. It has attack, decay, sustain, release. And then it's an analog envelope creator, an analog circuit that makes it. But it's a digital control system that controls when different parts of the envelope fire. So it gives you the ability that way to do different envelope shapes like ADSR standard, attack release, attack sustain, or attack decay sustain, attack release. So it gives you second firing or cycling or whatever you want it to do. There's a knob mode with I think it's 9 different modes on there, and they work differently with gates and with triggers. You can either fire the envelope with a trigger or have it hold and sustain with a gate or have it ignore that it's a gate. It's expanded or expandable with 4 more knobs that let you do CV control over each stage. The stage range in time for each stage is about 10 minutes to, I think, either 1 or 10 milliseconds. So very, 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 very slow to imperceptibly fast. Yeah. So so that's what it does, and it has standard 8-volt output or bipolar 8-volt output. So it gives you positive 8 to negative 8, and then a either inverted version of the bipolar output or just a negative output. So that's the multimode envelope. We have the third module I ever designed is the Micro Hadron Collider filter.
Oh, maybe
or
just add that on this envelope you have a push button, so you can use it to...
There is a manual
yes.
push button, so you can fire it directly if you want to. Yep.
Donc cette enveloppe-là plus l'expander, ça fait une des enveloppes les plus complètes en fait que vous pouvez avoir, parce que vous avez le contrôle de chaque section en fait,
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and on the expander, this is something I should explain. There's a switch that lets you either re-trigger the envelope from 0 if it's not decayed all the way or released all the way. It will either pull it down to 0 and then boost it back up, or it'll continue from where you left off. So for different types of sounds, it's useful to have both options. And then with the non-expanded version, that's a jumper setting that you can change. So, because that's something that's kind of a taste selectable thing that some people like and some people don't like. This is when an envelope doesn't re-trigger. So, yep. So that's the multimode envelope. The Micro Hadron Collider is a dual state variable filter with unstable resonance with a voltage controlled crossfader in the middle. So what all that means is that it's 2 filters, and each one can be low pass, high pass, or band pass. It's a 12 dB per octave filter always. And then you can have 2 different filter settings and run them into this crossfader and get two sounds out of it at once or fade between the two. So I will go ahead and make a patch with that. And it does not self-oscillate in a resonant fashion, so it doesn't work as a sine wave oscillator, but it does track 1 volt per octave, so it's useful for doing melodic stuff.
Là, on est sur un double filtre avec beaucoup de caractères, et vous allez voir qu'on peut le patcher de différentes façons pour faire des choses très compliquées. C'est un des filtres les plus intéressants si vous aimez les expérimentations et surtout les interactions entre deux filtres. Il a beaucoup de caractères, vous allez voir qu'il n'est pas très... Il ne se laisse pas marcher sur les pieds.
Et pourtant, il reprend une simple solution.
Non.
Okay. All right, so this is just a plain sawtooth wave running into the filter. And we're hearing the low pass of the left output. I'll turn the resonance down. So pretty standard. Bring the resonance up a little bit. This is where it starts to get unstable and nasty. So I'm going to turn down just to make sure when it does that it's not so bad. And then it goes, the resonance goes a little bit higher and you can hear it very unstable. So, but you can rein this in just by dialing the input attenuator down. Most important knob on the filter to get a good sound, or the sound you want, is the input attenuator.
C'est ce qu'on disait tout à l'heure. Là, il y a des atténuateurs sur le filtre qui permettent de contrôler la quantité de signal qu'on injecte dedans. C'est très important pour avoir des différences de son.
And it'll still go into that high frequency self-resonance, but that's the sound of the filter. And then if we fade to the other side, so these are the two filters that are active right now. They're about the same frequency. So you can fade between these two. Or you can run one into the other one and do like an MS-20 style filter, which is a high pass into a low pass, where you have the first filter controlling the high pass, and then the second filter controlling the low pass. So, or you could have them both band pass. So it's a pretty versatile kind of open-ended filter. You can do a lot of different things with. There's a notch output on the second filter, and the reason I added this was so that in low pass on the first, cascaded to this one, you could do a 4-pole elliptic filter, which was a good idea. It doesn't really sound much different than a regular low pass though, in practice. But the notch filter can be kind of fun. It's kind of like a phaser. As you turn up the resonance, the notch gets shallower, or sharper, but it goes from, so notch filter basically, here's your frequency response, right? And here's the frequency up in time. And it will, this is a nice shallow notch filter, and this is like minus 60 dB, so basically off, and it will do more like this as you turn up the resonance. And it'll get sharper. So, which means it's a little bit less audible with things. So turning up the, you get more of your waveform back. So that's a sweep with maximum resonance. You can barely hear it, but that's a nice phaser sound. So that's what the Hadron Collider does, and I can patch in. So there's how you do some of your MS-20 style sounds with just a single sawtooth wave. It's not too complicated of a patch, so it's not as thick as it otherwise would be. But so that's the Micro Hadron Collider. I'm gonna go to the digital VCA next.
Just
Or
before,
good question.
maybe you need to add that you can do crazy things when you patch the out of one filter to the input of the first filter and the output of the first filter.
You can do pretty wild feedback
Yes.
patching because it distorts nicely, and the non-stable resonance will make it not lock up generally. And you have a phase switch that will help you make sure that it doesn't ever lock up when you're using the mix output. So yeah, you can do some fairly wild and interesting like feedback patching. So
And this is there is two input for the first filter, which is very useful for different situations. If you need to put one source signal, then the output of another signal into to create feedback loop,
right,
it's very useful.
turn it down so you don't get too loud. So that's the feedback. So that's a feedback-based patch that's kind of it's fun to experiment and, yeah. And it is sometimes it will totally lock itself out, but very unstable by design. So, all right. So next,
And maybe it will be the last one.
okay, that is fine. Then why don't next we do? Yeah, the digital VCA I think would be good. That's an easy one. So this is a VCA that started off as a joke. I was talking to Suit and Tie Guy on the phone, and it was his idea. He said, you know what would be ridiculous is making a VCA so excessively complicated that it has to be digital. So we kind of talked about it and laughed about it for a little while, and then I thought about it some, and I looked at the datasheet for a digital potentiometer, which is what it uses. It's a microcontroller, an ADC to sense your CV, and a digital potentiometer chip, which is a normal, it's basically a knob, but that has the ability to be controlled with a microcomputer. So it's got 256 steps of output level, and with that, it has it's basically the VCA part. That's all it does. But what's interesting about it is that you have to tell the VCA chip the digital potentiometer what data to use and what that data is, so you have the ability to manipulate the data. So what we added was a zero crossing detector, which it's a detector circuit that looks at your input signal, determines when it's crossing this 0 point right here, and then says, okay, when it's there, go ahead and change the data. Now, that doesn't sound like it does anything, but what it does do is if you have a sine wave going through, we'll patch this envelope. So this is the envelope set with the maximum attack rate. What it does is if you move the zero crossing detector on, it eliminates all the pops. And you can drive this directly with a gate.
Donc ça enlève tous les clics qu'il peut y avoir.
So it can be used as DSR, as
DSR.
comme un compresseur, parce que quasiment quoi.
He asked if it can use as a compressor comme DSR or something like that.
No, it's not set up for that. It's just a VCA. You could patch it to do that with an envelope follower and a filter to do a de-esser. Yeah. So, but no, it's just that's a gate controlling the sine wave, and that's a zero crossing detector. And then you can make it you could also add in a circuit another control that will make it only change when there's a gate or something, when some other signal, so you can control when it looks at the CV. But this is the most useful thing for doing sub basses and very clean sine wave work. So
very simple modules. You have two of them into this one.
yeah, there's two of them. There's the instant mode, there's gate mode, which is the delayed, tell it when to update, and there's zero crossing detector mode. And the CV has a switch for 5 volts or 8 volts, depending on what envelopes you're using, and you get two of them. So that is that.
Ok, so je pense qu'on a... Ah, oui.
Il y a deux questions. Why are the apps 0 to 8 volts?
Oh, what did you choose 0 to 8 volts? Yes.
8 volts is the Doepfer standard,
Okay.
but other people use 5 volts, so I had to add 5 volts.
Okay.
So it's it's why did other people choose 8 or 5 volts? That's the question.
Okay.
Because it's the old Doepfer standard.
Et l'autre question?
What is your favorite module?
My
What would you recommend for a new customer?
My favorite module, right now, it's the noise engineering, the Simulus, Iteritas.
From you.
It's wild.
From you.
No, well, I mean, it's his design.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, my favorite module for
Yes,
me. Oh,
yes.
not my favorite module. Okay.
Yeah. But this is a good information.
Favorite one? Yeah. Favorite one that I've ever done, I think, is the phase displacement oscillator. Because of the sounds that I can get out of it are kind of the type of music I like to make, like some of the more techno-y sounds. And if you match this up with a filter and do it has another expander that's a quad anti-aliasing filter. If you run it as a feedback through that, either really nasty like high resonance 303 type distortion that is just, it's really fun. So yeah, I think that's my favorite module that I've designed.
J'ai l'impression qu'il aime beaucoup la distorsion. Je sais pas comment le formuler.
He says that it seems that you like a lot of distortion, but you don't know how to say that very clearly.
I love distortion. Yeah. But
Okay.
lots of different
Contrôler la
types.
distorsion, quoi. C'est un travail intéressant.
Did you have any question about all what you have seen today?
My brain is fried.
That's why I think it's well. Thank you very much. It was very good.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I think now we will take some time to patch, to try, and to have some beers. I think.
Yeah. It's there's only so long you can talk about individual modules without actually diving in and making a good patch. So.
Ok, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
On va dire au revoir à nos amis d'internet. Merci de nous avoir suivis. Vous retrouvez cette vidéo, si vous nous avez pris en cours, vous retrouvez cette vidéo sur notre chaîne YouTube dans quelques jours. Et puis voilà, nous on va continuer à patcher et à s'amuser parce que c'est ça aussi l'intérêt de venir sur place. Et puis on vous dit à bientôt pour la prochaine. Regardez dans la section agenda de notre blog modularsquare.com/blog parce que c'est là qu'on mettra les dates des prochaines dates. Et on vous dit à bientôt. Salut.
Au revoir.